Good afternoon, everyone. We'll just give it another minute. We're still waiting on a few attendees, but we'll start right at 6 o'clock. Okay, so let's get started. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Renee Ainsworth, and I'm the clerk for the Township of Springwater. So this candidate information session is being hosted by the City of Orillia and the Townships of Severn, Oro-Medonte, Ramera, and Springwater in partnership with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. So first, I'm going to introduce you to our panel this evening. Joining us from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing are Municipal Advisors Sav Johal and Verity Martin. Joining us from the various municipalities are Allison Gray, the clerk for the Township of Severn, Jennifer Connor, the clerk for the Township of Ramera, Christine Preston and Robin Cadeau, assistant clerks for the City of Orillia, and Jennifer Marshall, deputy clerk for the Township of Springwater. So the first hour of the session will include a presentation from Municipal Affairs, followed by an hour of question and answers. So at any time throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A function found at the bottom of the screen to submit your questions, and we will answer them once the presentation is completed. So thank you everyone again for joining us, and I'll now turn it over to Sav and Verity for the presentation.
Renee, I'd just like potential candidates from Oro-Medonte to know that I'm also here. I think you missed me in the introductions.
Oh, my apologies.
That's okay. It's Yvonne from Township of Oro-Medonte.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that introduction, Renee. If I could just ask Jennifer to display the presentation and we'll get started right away. So our presentation is lengthy today. It's been described as drinking from a from a fire hose. So just prepare yourselves, but hopefully it will be informative for you and it will help. So I'll just wait for the presentation to come up and then we'll get started. Okay, here we go. So hello everyone, my name is Sav Johal and I have here with me today Verity Martin. We are municipal advisors from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and we're here to present information for candidates, third-party advertisers, and school board trustees pertaining to the 2022 municipal elections. We'd like to thank the Township of Springwater, the City of Orillia, the Township of Ramera, Oro-Medonte, and Severn for planning and hosting the session today. And we'd like to thank you as well for your time in being here. Also, congratulations for taking an interest in your community and in local government. Next slide, please. So before we begin, I do have some housekeeping notes to share. The first one being that these slides are meant to be a summary of some of the sections of the Municipal Elections Act and Municipal Act, and they should not be relied on for legal or official purposes. I do want to stress that we are not lawyers and you should always consult the legislation and seek legal advice or accounting advice when necessary. Additionally, we will not be able to cover every aspect of municipal elections, but we hope that this presentation provides you with a better understanding of the campaigning process and relevant legislation. So again, to save time, I may give a high-level summary of some of the slides, but I recommend that you download a copy of this presentation. I believe it is available on everyone's website, and read it again at home in detail. Also, at the end of the presentation, there are links to the 2022 Candidates Guide, the Voters Guide, the Third-Party Advertisers Guide, as well as the legislation itself. The guides cover most of the information we will be discussing here, and they provide more details They break concepts down in a more digestible manner, and they provide examples. So I highly encourage you to read those as well. If at any point you can't hear me or the audio isn't good, please type that into the chat box, and one of the panel members, feel free to interrupt me and I'll speak louder or move my laptop. So next slide, please. So this slide outlines the topics we will be covering during the presentation. As mentioned, we request that you please hold your questions until the end of the presentation, or you can type them in the chat box, but we will get to them at the end of the presentation. If we're unable to answer your question, or if your question is very specific or personal to a situation you have, our contact information is listed at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to send us an email or call us at any time, and we would be happy to assist you. And that means later on in the year as well. Anytime you have elections related questions, feel free to reach out. And so with that, I will jump into today's presentation. Next slide, please. Section 2 of the Municipal Act stipulates that municipalities are created by the province to be responsible and accountable governments with respect to matters within their jurisdiction. As many of you are planning to become council members, you may want to take a quick scan or an in-depth read of the Municipal Act for more information on the powers and duties that a municipality has. On the second last slide of this deck, there is a link to the relevant pieces of legislation that council members would refer to. Next slide, please. This slide illustrates the relationship between council and staff. Before we get into the information about campaigning, in the next few slides, we're going to briefly touch on the role of the mayor, the role of council, and the role of municipal staff, and the relationship between all three, which is key for an effective and efficient local government. We encourage you to read these slides in more detail at your own leisure. Next slide, please. Council has many roles, which are listed on this slide as well as the next, and are found in the Municipal Act. Some of those roles include maintaining the financial integrity of the municipality, ensuring the accountability and transparency of the operations of the municipality, as well as determining which services the municipality should provide. Next slide, please. Council also conducts meetings, passes bylaws, and develops policies. It's important to remember that these decisions are made as a collective group, with all members of council, including the mayor and deputy mayor, only having one vote, and the affirmative outcome becomes the strategic direction for staff. I mentioned that the Municipal Act sets out the many responsibilities and limitations for council. Your municipality's procedural bylaw also outlines the specific policies your municipality has adopted when it comes to making decisions during council meetings. So again, that's another document that you may wish to refer to better understand your future role as a councillor. And the procedural bylaw can be found on your municipality's website, or you can reach out to the local clerk or clerk's office for that document. Next slide, please. As I previously mentioned, although all decisions must be made as a collective group, there are some differences between the role of the mayor and councillors. The mayor is the figurehead for council. So again, that doesn't mean they can make decisions by themselves, but they do represent the municipality at official functions. They preside over council meetings so that its business can be carried out efficiently and effectively, and they provide leadership to the council. Next slide, please. Mayors also promote the purposes of the municipality and are key figures in public involvement. Next slide, please. The role of staff is set out in Section 227 of the Municipal Act. A key feature of effective and efficient councils is a well-developed understanding of the council-staff relationship and the role of each party. As we discussed, council provides direction, but staff implements council's decisions. And they do that by establishing administrative practices and procedures to carry out council's decisions, undertaking research and providing advice to council on policies and programs of the municipality, and carrying out duties as required by legislation or other duties assigned by the municipality. It's important for you to know that some municipal staff positions, including those of the clerk, the treasurer, the chief building official, and the fire chief, have statutory obligations. It's important that council does not interfere with the statutory obligations of those roles. Next slide, please. The function of the CAO within, or the Chief Administrative Officer within the municipality, is similar to the role of a Chief Executive Officer in a business environment. The CAO is responsible for the general control and management of the day-to-day operations of the municipality, which may include developing and implementing appropriate internal administrative practices and procedures to ensure the efficient, effective, and accountable operations of the municipality. To help understand the role of the CAO in a municipality, picture an hourglass. Council is at one end and all municipal staff and department heads are at the other end. The CAO is in the middle, the smallest part where sand in an hourglass has to flow through. So if council wants to give direction to a specific department head, then the communication has to flow through the CAO. Likewise, if staff want to give information or reports to council, it too would flow through the CAO. So it's a very important role. Next slide, please. It's important to understand the roles and responsibilities of an elected official, which is why the next few slides are included in this presentation. However, today's session is focused on campaigning and we have a lot to cover. So I'm going to quickly go through the next few slides pertaining to your potential future role as a councillor, but I encourage you to read these slides later in your own time. Also refer to the councillor's guide, which is linked in the references section at the end of the presentation. So this slide provides you with a high-level overview of the relationship between council and staff. In general, it's the role of the elected council to represent the community and set the direction and policy for the municipality. It's the role of staff to manage people and resources to achieve council's vision. The relationship between staff and council is interconnected, and it's important for council members and staff to respect one another's roles so that they can serve the public in an effective and efficient manner. Next slide, please. It's also important to remember that you were elected by your constituents to represent their views when dealing with issues that come before council. However, your constituents will have many views and opinions, and you cannot represent all of them all of the time. For many issues, you will have to consider a variety of opposing interests and make judgments that will not be, make decisions that will not be popular with everyone. You should use your judgment and decide based on the best interest of the municipality as a whole. Next slide, please. This slide outlines the general process undertaken when creating policies. Next slide, please. Another important role for a municipal council is to ensure that the municipality's financial and administrative resources are being used as efficiently as possible. Next slide, please. Ontario's municipalities and members of council operate under a legislated accountability and transparency framework, which includes rules for the municipality and rules for members of council and local boards. Ensuring accountability and transparency of the municipality is one of council's roles under Section 224 of the Municipal Act, and it is a priority in maintaining public trust. And councillors are, of course, accountable to the public as elected officials. This slide outlines the policies that councils are required to adopt to support that framework. Next slide, please. Every municipality has a code of conduct that sets out the expectations and standards for councillor conduct. You may wish to look up the code of conduct for the municipality you are running for and familiarize yourself with its requirements. Next slide, please. Municipalities can have a variety of accountability officers as part of their transparency and accountability framework, including a closed meeting investigator, an auditor general, and an integrity commissioner. An integrity commissioner operates independent of council and reports to council with respect to the application of a code of conduct of members of council and local boards, and the procedures, rules, and policies governing the ethical behavior of members of council and local boards. Next slide, please. The Ontario Ombudsman also has a role with respect to municipalities, and more information about the Ontario Ombudsman can be found on this slide. Next slide, please. Personal privacy and other confidentiality issues are an important practical and legal consideration for municipal councillors and staff. The Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act is the primary statute for privacy and confidentiality. It sets out the rules for the collection, use, and disclosure of personal information. With that, I am concluding the portion of the presentation pertaining to council and staff roles, and we're going to switch gears back to election campaigning, starting with the role of a school board trustee. Next slide, please. The Education Act creates 4 different kinds of school boards, which are listed on this slide. School board trustees are members of the school board. They are locally elected representatives of the public, and they are the community's advocate for public education. Only the board, not an individual trustee, has the authority to make decisions or take action. A trustee is often the first point of contact for parents and community members who have questions and/or concerns about their local school. Candidates should contact the applicable school board for further information about their duties and commitments. Next slide, please. The role of a school board trustee is to establish policy direction and participate in making decisions that benefit the entire school board while representing the interests of constituents. School board trustees are accountable to constituents, the Ministry of Education, and families. It's important to note one major difference between school board trustees and municipal candidates. If a municipal candidate works in a municipality, they cannot run in that municipality without taking a leave of absence, but they can run in any other municipality without taking a leave of absence. So they just can't run in the municipality that they are working in. For a school board trustee candidate, if they are employed in any school board and they decide to run for a school board trustee position, they have to take a leave of absence, even if they're running in a different school board from where they work. That being said, all potential candidates that work for a municipality or school board should check with their employer for any policies or procedures the employer may have in place about that situation. Next slide, please. In order to run for office for a municipality, you must be an eligible elector, which means you have to be able to vote. So the list on this slide shows both voter eligibility as well as eligibility to run and hold office. Next slide, please. This slide also lists the eligibility requirements for a school board trustee to be eligible to run. And I just want to stress one more time, if you are an employee of any school board and you wish to run for a trustee position on any school board in the province, you must take an unpaid leave of absence before you file your nomination form. If elected, you must resign from your job. You cannot work for a school board and be a trustee in Ontario at the same time. Questions about school board eligibility should be directed to the school board secretary. Next slide, please. Third-party advertising refers to advertisements or materials that support, promote, or oppose a candidate, or support, promote, or oppose a yes or no answer to a question on the ballot. The meaning of third party in this context means a person or entity who is not a candidate, but is still an entity advocating for issues related to a municipal election. Third-party advertising is separate from any candidate's campaign and must be done independently from a candidate. A third-party advertisement is an advertisement in any broadcast, print, electronic, or other medium that promotes, supports, or opposes a candidate or a yes or no answer to a question on the ballot. Advertisements include traditional ads as well as materials such as brochures or signs. Activities that do not involve spending money, such as discussions or expressing an opinion about a candidate, are not considered to be third-party advertising. So examples include speaking to your friends and neighbors, posting on social media such as Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, sending an email to a group or mailing list that you already have. So that would not be considered third-party advertising. Next slide, please. Only the following persons and entities are eligible to file a notice of registration: an individual who is normally a resident in Ontario, a corporation that carries on business in Ontario, or a trade union that holds bargaining rights for employees in Ontario. Groups like associations or clubs that are not incorporated cannot register to conduct third-party advertising. Next slide, please. The first day for filing nominations was May 1st, 2022. So the clerk's office can now accept nominations at any time. While they are open, while the clerk's office is open. And the last day and time for filing nominations for the 2022 municipal elections is on Friday, August 19th, 2022 by 2 p.m. If a candidate withdraws their nomination, they are still required to file a campaign financial statement covering all of the financial transactions made during their campaign. Even if you haven't spent any money or raised any funds, even if your campaign was only 2 days before you decided to withdraw, you still have to submit that financial form. It's very easy. You just download the financial statement and there is a box to click that says you didn't spend or raise money, and then you sign the form. And Verity will go into more details later in the presentation. If a nomination is withdrawn, the candidate is entitled to a refund of their nomination filing fee only after they file their financial or auditor statements by the required deadline. In the candidate's guide, the ministry has provided a few examples showing what happens when candidates change their mind about which office to run for after they've already filed a nomination paper. So again, I would highly recommend that you read the candidate's guide, as it does go into more detail about each of the requirements for nomination. Next slide, please. Starting on May 1st until the close of business on August 19th, nominations can be submitted to the clerk from anyone who meets the eligibility criteria to run. Candidates must complete Form 1, the nomination paper, and submit it to the clerk along with the applicable nomination filing fee. The filing fee is $200 for anyone running for the head of council and $100 for all other offices. The clerk must be satisfied that you are eligible to run in order to certify your nomination. To do so, the clerk can ask you to show identification or fill out an additional form to prove that you are eligible to run for that particular office. If your nomination is not certified by the clerk, your name will not appear on the ballot. Additionally, the nomination form must have original signatures. If you live in a municipality with wards, as long as you are eligible to vote in the municipality as a whole, you can run for any ward. With regards to electronic filing, we understand that the municipalities here today will not be allowing electronic filing for this election, so you do have to book an appointment with the clerk's office to file that paperwork in person. Next slide, please. Municipal council candidates are required to obtain 25 nomination signatures on their Form 2 unless the municipality has less than 4,000 electors. If the candidate wishes, they can also provide more than 25 signatures. And actually, we do recommend that you obtain more than 25 in case later on one of the signatures or nominators were not eligible and they get crossed off. If you have more than 25, you'll always have the applicable 25. If you end up with less than 25, it could cause issues later. So we do recommend getting more than 25 signatures. The requirement for nominators to sign nomination forms does not apply to school board candidates, only municipal election candidates. Nominators can nominate more than one candidate, and they are not required to vote for that candidate. Nominators must meet the eligibility requirements of a municipal elector at the time that they sign the nomination form. So they must be of voting age when they sign that form, and their birthday can't be the week after. They also must reside in the municipality. In a ward system, the nominator can be anyone who is eligible to vote in the municipality, not just that specific ward. Both the clerk and the candidate are entitled to rely on the information provided by the nominator. However, if the nominator did not meet the eligibility requirements when they signed the document, they could be held accountable under the penalty section of the Municipal Elections Act, even if they did it accidentally. So you may want to let your nominators know the requirements before they sign and confirm with them that to make sure they meet all the requirements so that they don't get penalized later on because of a misunderstanding. And again, candidates should remember that they are required to obtain the original signatures, even if electronic filing was permitted, and to keep those original signatures until the next regular election in 2026. Next slide, please. Occasionally, a candidate changes their mind and decides to run for a different office. You can only run for one office at a time. If you file a second nomination for another office, the first nomination is automatically withdrawn. If you file your second nomination in another municipality, you may want to contact the clerk of the first municipality to let them know out of courtesy. If a candidate decides to run for another office in the same municipality and they've already collected the 25 endorsement signatures or more than 25, they can use those same endorsement signatures for the other office in the same municipality. If your municipality does not have a ward system and you decide to run for a different office on the same council, Everything from your first campaign can be transferred to the second campaign, and only one financial statement needs to be filed. However, if your municipality has a ward system and you decide to run for a different ward, then your second nomination is considered a separate campaign and 2 separate financial statements must be filed. Next slide, please. Individuals, corporations, and trade unions may register to become third-party advertisers. There is no registration fee for third-party advertisers. A third-party advertiser would register with the clerk at the local municipality, and that requires a notice of registration to be a registered third party. And the notice must be filed in the prescribed form and must include a declaration of qualification signed by the individual or by a representative of the corporation or trade union. Once registered, the third-party advertiser can advertise in support or opposition to any candidate being elected by voters in the municipality. So that includes council positions, school board trustee positions, and upper tier candidates. Any person or entity may advertise regarding any issue relating to elections in the municipality without registering, but to advertise regarding questions on the ballot, you are required to register. For a regular election, the registration cannot be filed earlier than the first day for filing nominations and cannot be filed later than the Friday before voting day. Once the clerk certifies the notice of registration, the individual, corporation, or trade union is officially a registered third party. If an individual wants to influence voters in more than one municipality, they have to register in each municipality. So they have to register in each municipality. If a municipality believes and has supporting evidence that there has been a contravention of the Municipal Elections Act by the third-party advertiser, they can ask the third-party advertiser to remove the advertisements or discontinue the advertising. Next slide, please. If an individual is registered as a third-party advertiser and then they decide they want to become a candidate for council position instead, and they file a nomination, their third-party advertiser registration is automatically withdrawn and their advertising campaign would automatically end. However, if you work in a corporation or a trade union that registers as a third-party advertiser and you decide to run and become a candidate, that wouldn't impact the corporation that you work for that is registered because you are different from the corporation that is registered. So for example, if I as an individual register to become a third-party advertiser, and then I decide I want to run for a ward councillor position instead, and I file my nomination, my third-party advertising campaign automatically ended. But if I worked as an accountant for XYZ company, and XYZ company registers to become a third-party advertiser, I can still freely register to become a candidate and nothing happens to XYZ company's third-party advertising campaign. Because even though I work for them, we are separate entities. So they can continue doing their advertising and I can do mine. However, if this situation was real, I would be very careful to keep myself separate from my company's third-party advertising so I don't get accused of collaborating with them. Because as I mentioned earlier, third-party advertisers cannot work under the direction of a candidate and vice versa. They must be separate. Finances relating to a third-party advertising campaign cannot be transferred to a candidate's campaign. So again, using the example of if I first registered as a third-party advertiser and put in money into my account, and then I decide to run as a candidate, I cannot transfer anything from my third-party campaign to my candidate's campaign. I have to start fresh, and they become 2 separate campaigns. Similarly, someone registered as an individual third-party advertiser or a candidate cannot hand over their campaign to another person. So for example, if I was registered as an individual third-party advertiser, but I had to leave the country for personal reasons, I can't just assign somebody to take my place when I'm the one who registered. I would have to close down my campaign. Registration period for third-party advertisers runs until the Friday before voting day, October 21st, 2022, or the last day the clerk's office is open before voting day in a by-election. Again, as a candidate or third-party advertiser or school board trustee, make sure you are aware of all the dates and deadlines all the way until December or further so that you can prepare in advance. If you're not sure, feel free to reach out to us or your local clerk's office. Next slide, please. So campaign accounts are only required if the candidate or third-party advertiser raises or spends money. If you know for certain that your campaign will not raise funds and you do not plan on spending money because that's what you decided, you don't need to open a campaign account. If you do open a campaign account, please make sure you make all of your purchases through that account, even if it's for $1, even if you go to the dollar store to pick up poster boards for your campaign, you have to use your campaign account. If you don't, and later on you go to file your financial statements, you will run into issues because technically that's a contravention of the Municipal Elections Act to use any other payment method, especially your own personal debit card. So even if you drove 3 hours away to pick something up and you realized you forgot your campaign account debit card, don't use your personal debit card. Trade unions and corporations are not eligible to contribute to candidates' campaigns, although they can participate in the election as third-party advertisers or make contributions to other third-party advertising campaigns. Municipalities must establish rules and procedures regarding the use of municipal or local board resources, including the municipality's logo, the municipality's website, and municipal printers or other resources during the campaign period. So as a candidate, you want to make sure you are aware of those rules by reaching out to your municipality to ask for them. Usually they'll be included in your municipality's nomination package. Again, please refer to the candidate's guide for examples of what is considered a contribution. Next slide, please. It's important to note that contributions from a candidate and their spouse are considered to have come from the same person and count against the self-contribution limit. Both the candidate and the contributor are responsible for ensuring that they are following the rules of the Municipal Elections Act. So please inform your contributors so that they can acknowledge those rules and determine how much or if they are eligible to contribute to your campaign. So as a candidate, you want to make sure that you are also educated as well, because at any time you can be taken to a compliance audit committee or even to courts if someone chooses to. And I don't mean to scare anyone, but that's why we emphasize knowing the rules, keeping your receipts, your expenses, keeping yourself organized so that if that ever happens, you're ready to go and you're not stressed out at that time. So remember, you must issue a receipt for every contribution you receive. The receipt should show who made the contribution, the date, and the value. If the contribution was in goods or services, you have to determine the value of those goods or services and issue a receipt for that full value. So as long as you have all the necessary information, you can make your receipts look however you want. So we do recommend using carbon copy invoices so that you can keep one for yourself and give one to your contributor as well. If there is a special circumstance, we recommend writing yourself a note, either on the receipt itself or on a separate log, so that when you're filing your financial statements, you can remember why a certain situation happened, or if you're questioned about it later on, especially next year or a few months from now, if you have it written down, you'll make sure you won't forget. So it does seem tedious, but the more you record now, the more you'll thank yourself later. You are required to return any contribution that was made or accepted in contravention of the Municipal Elections Act as soon as you learn that it was ineligible. If you can't return the contribution to the contributor, you have to turn it over to the clerk. More information can be found in the third-party advertiser's guide or the candidate's guide. And remember, the clerk will be preparing a separate report in respect of each contributor who appears to have contravened any of the contribution limits, and they may face penalties under the Municipal Elections Act. So again, it's very important that you inform your contributors of their limits. You might even want to write those limits down on the invoice. You might want to ask each time that they decide to contribute to you, because you don't want them to get in trouble after because of an honest mistake. When it comes to a corporation providing a contribution to a third-party advertiser, if one corporation controls the others directly or indirectly, then they are considered to be the same contributor. If the corporation is owned or controlled by the same person or group of people, either directly or indirectly, they are considered to be the same contributor. So for example, if one person owns 3 different restaurants under the name Food Incorporated, a third-party advertiser can only accept 1 contribution from Food Incorporated and not 1 contribution from each restaurant, because the 3 restaurants technically belong to the same corporation. So it's 1. Next slide, please. This slide lists the parties that a candidate or third-party advertiser cannot accept a contribution from. Another consideration is volunteers helping your campaign. The value of services provided by volunteers is generally not considered to be a contribution. However, if the volunteer is a professional, so an accountant or a lawyer, and they volunteer to provide you services for which they would normally be paid for, the market value of the service must be recorded as a contribution by the volunteer and a campaign expense from your end as a candidate. Even if you don't hand that money over to them, you have to record it on your financial statement. And the reason for this, the way you should think about it is the financial statements are there to make sure that you are acting accountably and transparently, so that at the end of your campaign, any resident can look up your financial statements to see what you did with your contributions and to make sure that, again, your campaign was transparent. So that's the reason that you're recording this, even though technically you didn't give anyone money. So for an example, if you had a friend who's an accountant and she's keeping your records for you, you have to list her time as a contribution. So if she usually charges $30, including tax per hour, and she spent 5 hours on your campaign, you would have to include $150, so $30 times 5 hours, as a contribution from your friend and as an expense on your end, even though, again, you didn't actually give her any money. It still needs to be recorded. If you encounter this situation during your campaign and you have any questions, again, feel free to contact us or your local clerk's office. As mentioned previously, only third-party advertisers can accept contributions from corporations and unions. Next slide, please. Campaign contributions are money, goods, or services given to a candidate for his or her election. Cash contributions can only be accepted up to $25. Contributions more than $25 must be made by check, money order, or a method that clearly shows where the funds came from. So we get lots of questions about electronic transfers of money. And that isn't referred to in the Municipal Elections Act. So technically, as a candidate, it's up to you to decide that if accepting electronic payments meets the requirements for contribution. So can you clearly identify who contributed? Can you make sure that they were not a trade union or a corporation? Can you make sure that they are a resident of Ontario? So some people believe that you can, and they take e-transfers. Other people don't want to take that risk, and they don't. But at the end of the day, it's up to you to make that decision. The clerk or us cannot make that decision for you. You may want to reach out seek legal advice or advice from an accountant if you're not sure. You must keep the following campaign records. Again, receipts issued for every contribution, including when you accepted the contribution and the date you issued the receipt. Remember to issue receipts for yourself as well for any contributions you make. The value of every contribution, whether it's in the form of money or goods or services, and the contributor's name and address. Receipts obtained for each expense. Again, even if that expense was $1, you have to keep the receipt. Any claim for payment of an expense that the campaign may dispute or refuse to pay. So even though you haven't paid them yet because you don't believe you have to, you still have to record that on your financial statement, and you can make a little note that indicates the situation, but it needs to be recorded. The funds raised and expenses incurred for each separate fundraising event or activity, the terms of any loan received from a bank or other recognized lending institution. So I would highly encourage you to look at the financial forms now to get an idea of where you will be recording this information. And if you have any questions or you're unsure, you can ask in advance. Again, you can contact us, contact the clerk's office, or contact an accredited accountant. If you already know that you will be you will have an accredited accountant fill out your financial statements, I do recommend booking those services in advance. There's actually not, you can run into the risk of not finding an accredited accountant that wants to take this on, because it is very different. It's very legal in nature. So you don't want to wait until the very end and then everybody's booked and you can't find anyone and the deadlines are looming. So to save yourself that headache, make those preparations now. Fundraising functions are events or activities held by or on behalf of a candidate for the primary purpose of raising money for the candidate's campaign. The price of admission to a fundraising function is a campaign contribution, and a receipt must be issued for the full amount. Money raised by events at a fundraising campaign, like a raffle or selling baked goods, also must be recorded as contributions. The contribution is the difference between the market value and what you are selling it for. So for example, if I bought cookies for $1, but I'm selling them for $5 at my fundraising event, each person that bought a cookie contributed $4 to my campaign. So the $5 I'm selling it for minus the $1 I bought it for. Receipts must be issued for every contribution over $25 and should contain the name and address of the contributor and the amount that was provided and the date. So instead of $5 cookies, if I sold t-shirts for $50 and I bought the t-shirt for $1, payment would have to be given to me by check or money order. And I would have to issue a receipt and record the contributor's information. It's very important that, and again, I'm stressing this again, it's very important that you keep these records accurate and safe. Verity will talk about compliance audits later in the presentation, but again, you can be brought to court at any time between now and the next regular election in 2026. So you want to keep those documents organized. You want to keep them in a binder or a box, and keep them in a safe place that you won't forget about them or lose them, so you can bring them up at any time you need to. Next slide, please. The limit on contributions to any one candidate or registered third-party advertiser is $1,200. The individual contribution amount has increased from $750 to $1,200, but the aggregate amount of $5,000 stays the same. So for example, in one municipality, I can contribute up to $5,000 to various election candidates. I can give one person $500, I can give another person $1,000, I can give another person $50 until I reach my $5,000 max. Then I have to stop. And remember, I can only give each person up to $1,200. So that is why we say make sure you write or record how much money a contributor has given to you, so that you can both keep track of that money, and you can notice when a contributor is reaching their $1,200 limit. And that way you can decline to accept anything further, because if you do, you're just going to have to return it to them or return it to the clerk because it's ineligible. So again, to save yourself that headache, just make it very clear, I can only accept up to $1,200 from you. Please stop giving me money after that. Since candidates and third-party advertisers are required to inform contributors of contribution limits, again, you may want to inform them verbally or include those limits on the receipts that you provide. And again, when it comes to the $5,000 maximum amount, you can't ask them, how much have they given to others, or who did you give to? But just clarify with them, have you reached your $5,000 mark? If so, I can't accept any more from you. Next slide, please. Self-funding limits for municipal council candidates are based on the number of electors voting for the office, up to a maximum of $25,000 per candidate. So the formula for calculating the limit is $7,500 plus 20 cents per elector for head of council and $5,000 plus 20 cents per elector for other council offices. Again, the formula is in this slide deck and in the candidate's guide, so you can refer back to it at any time. And I will mention again, we recognize that the financial slides that we're discussing now can seem overwhelming, it can seem confusing, especially the first time you hear them. But when you go back and read this at your own pace, in a quiet room, it may become more clear. And again, if it isn't, you can contact us, you can contact the clerk's office, and we'd be happy to help. The highest self-funding limit that anyone can possibly have is $25,000. If the formula works out to a number that is over $25,000, you are capped at the $25,000 limit. There are no self-funding limits for school board candidates or third-party advertisers. Next slide, please. If you decide to kickstart your campaign by self-funding it, you are able to reclaim that amount only if you have a surplus at the end of your campaign. So do not contribute assuming that you will get it all back, because you may not. And that's regardless of if it was your own money or if you took a loan out. If you borrowed money and got a loan from a bank, that loan is not considered to be campaign income, and paying it back is not a campaign expense. It's considered a self-contribution, so you are responsible for paying that money back. However, any interest that you accumulate on that loan for your campaign can be recorded as a campaign expense. I will now pass it on to Verity to continue the campaign finances portion of the presentation, starting with campaign expenses. Thank you.
Thank you, Sav. So before I start, I just want to note that there will be some repetition. I know this is a lot of information to throw at you, and we just want to make sure we've highlighted the most important sections. So if we could just jump to the next slide. Campaign expenses are those costs incurred by the candidate on the candidate's behalf during their campaign or by a third-party advertiser during their campaign. The nomination filing fee is no longer an expense and is not included on the financial disclosure form. Goods and services donated to the campaign are also expenses and must be reported. A receipt must be provided for fair market value, and only nominated persons or third-party advertisers can incur expenses during the campaign period. Payment of any campaign expense must be drawn from the campaign account, and a receipt providing the details and proof of payment must be obtained. All expenses must be reported in the relevant financial disclosure form to be filed with the clerk by the candidate or the third-party advertiser. If you are paying for expenses with a credit card, make sure to keep notes and clear records as evidence that the expense was reimbursed from campaign funds in the campaign account. Next slide, please. If you have run in a previous election and you want to use leftover goods such as signs or office supplies from a previous campaign, you must determine what the current market value for those goods would be and claim that amount as a campaign expense. If you have leftover inventory at the end of this campaign, which you want to keep, it becomes your personal property, and storing it for future use would not be considered a campaign expense. Remember, goods and services donated by a professional need to be reported first as a contribution with a receipt issued for the market value of the contribution, and then it must be recorded as a campaign expense at market value. Next slide, please. So I've already talked a little bit about candidate spending limits, but I do want to review a couple of key points. The spending limit formula for candidates and the maximum amount for parties after voting day are set out in Ontario Regulation 101/97. They are set out here on this slide, and the clerk will calculate your spending limit twice. First, when you file your nomination form, they will calculate the spending limit based on the number of electors on the voters list as it existed on September 15th, 2018. The second calculation will be based on the number of electors on the voters list as it exists on September 15th, 2022. Whichever of these numbers is the highest is your final spending limit, and the clerk's calculation is final. Next slide, please. The clerk will also provide two spending limits to third-party advertisers. Again, the higher of the two will be the final spending limit. If a TPA has registered in more than one municipality, each registration is a separate campaign with its own spending limit, and therefore financial filing must be kept separate. Often, third-party advertisers that register to several municipalities will make joint purchases. This is fine, but make sure that those joint purchases are properly apportioned across each campaign for the financial filings. Third-party advertisers are required to ensure contributions and expenses are tracked and accounted for, maintain proper records, provide proper direction to those incurring expenses or accepting contributions on their behalf, and ensuring that spending limits are adhered to. Next slide. This slide outlines the only expenses which are not subject to the spending limit. Expenses related to fundraising functions are exempt from the spending limit, but in order to qualify as a fundraising function, an event must have the raising of money as its primary purpose. The financial disclosure form includes a dedicated section for fundraising functions. Campaign events at which incidental fundraising takes place do not qualify as fundraising functions. Similarly, a brochure promoting awareness of a candidate that contains contact information to make campaign contributions does not qualify as a fundraising function. Essentially, if you will not be able to demonstrate that the primary function of an event was fundraising, follow the expense and contribution rules for a regular campaign event. Expenses that were subject to the spending limit if incurred before voting day are not subject to the spending limit if incurred after voting day. This does not permit you to play with expenses. If a purchase was pre-election and the invoice comes in after the election, you must use it as an expense subject to the spending limit. Next slide. Third-party advertiser spending limits are similar to candidate spending limits. The general spending limit and the limit for expressions of appreciation and parties after voting day will be provided by the municipal clerk. Please ensure that you do not exceed any of your spending limits or use money dedicated for expressions of appreciation and parties to host, say, a birthday party for your spouse. Rule of thumb, be reasonable. If you use this money inappropriately, you may be subject to scrutiny and a compliance audit. Don't try to get away with things that aren't 100% above board. Next slide, please. It is important that you ensure that you are fully aware of your responsibilities regarding election spending and fundraising. You are your own chief financial officer, and you are liable for any ineligible contributions, misuse of funds, or any other violation of campaign finance rules. I encourage you to familiarize yourself with the financial sections of the Municipal Elections Act, review the candidates and third-party advertiser guides in detail, and review the financial statements you will be required to file before you spend any money or accept any contributions. We have already mentioned this, but I just want to stress that if you intend to spend any money, even if you're just buying t-shirts for volunteers, you must open a campaign-specific bank account. Next slide. You must maintain complete and accurate records of every financial transaction during the course of your campaign. If anyone is helping you with your campaign finances, please make sure that they have read the guides and financial forms and understand the different ways in which contributions, campaign income, fundraising events, and spending limits are treated. You may wish to formalize record-keeping policies and procedures for your campaign. This could include things like receipt templates and tracking documents, spreadsheets tracking contributions, expenses, and campaign income. I would recommend that you put in the legwork now, get yourself organized, and your campaign will run much smoother. And when you have to sit down and do this at the end of the day, you won't be scrambling. Everything will be in its place and it won't be a big deal. All contributions and expenses are to be accounted for and disclosed by the candidate on the relevant prescribed financial form. Additionally, all candidates and third-party advertisers are required to keep all campaign financial records. This is inclusive of all of your receipts until after November 15th, 2026, when a new council takes office. These rules apply regardless of whether or not you are elected. Next slide, please. This slide outlines some best practices for keeping your campaign finances organized. While I hope that none of you will ever become the subject to a compliance audit review, I encourage you to behave as though you will. Remember, you have to keep everything organized until the next council is elected in 2026. Next slide. We're now going to talk a little bit about campaign advertising. So this slide covers all of the information candidates are required to provide to publishers and broadcasters in writing before allowing campaign advertisements to appear. If you are advertising via signs, brochures, or any other format, candidates and third-party advertisers are required to identify themselves. You must take clear ownership of anything that you put out that is public-facing. The period during which third-party advertisements can appear is May 1st, 2022 until the close of voting on voting day, October 24th, 2022. Next slide. This slide talks about record retention for third-party advertisers and broadcasters for advertising that has been purchased. Remember, advertising about an issue rather than a candidate or a yes/no answer to a question on a ballot is not considered third-party advertising. For example, signs saying support local business or keep the waterfront green would not be third-party advertising, even if a candidate has made those issues part of their campaign. Next slide. All candidates are required to file Form 4 with the clerk, regardless of how much or how little they spent or fundraised. If you filed a nomination form, you must file a Form 4, even if you withdrew your nomination or you were acclaimed. If you are registered as a third-party advertiser, you must complete Form 8. A candidate may resubmit a financial statement to correct an error up until the filing deadline. However, they cannot withdraw a financial statement without filing a new one. If you think that you will be unable to file your financial statement by the deadline, you may apply to the Superior Court of Justice for an extension before March 31st, 2023. If the court grants you an extension, you will receive the refund of your nomination fee if you file by the deadline given to you by the court. If you have not filed your financial statement by the deadline, you may file your financial statement within 30 days after the deadline if you pay the municipality a $500 late filing fee. This grace period ends at 2 p.m. on Monday, May 1st, 2023. In addition to the $500 penalty, you will also not receive a refund of your nomination fee. Next slide, please. If your campaign spending exceeds $10,000, even by a cent, you must appoint an auditor to complete an audit before the financial statement filing deadline, so make sure you book well in advance. The auditor must be licensed under the Public Accounting Act of 2004, and keep in mind that the campaign statements are public documents and will be available for members of the public to inspect, and the public may scrutinize them. So the more accurate, clear, detailed information you provide, it will help reduce any questions that are raised after the fact. Next slide. Candidates can file their financial documents at any time after voting day to January 3rd, which is adjusted from the December 31st date outlined in the Municipal Elections Act, as that falls on a Saturday this round. Filing the financial statement ends the campaign period, which will make it much easier for acclamations and campaigns where little or no expenses are incurred. Clerks will be required to publish a report whether candidates have met their financial filing obligations, and publish that report on the municipal website or in another electronic form. This must be done by April 30th in the case of a regular election or within 90 days of a by-election. Next slide. The nomination fee is only refundable if the financial statement is filed on time. If a candidate or TPA feels that they will not meet this deadline, and I've already gone over this, but I'm saying it again because it's very important, you may apply to the courts for an extension, or you can pay that $500 fee and lose your nomination fee as well for that additional 30-day grace period. Next slide, please. When filing your financial statements, both candidates and third-party advertisers with campaign surpluses must pay the entire surplus amount to the clerk. The only exception there is that if you and your spouse made any contributions to your campaign, you are able to refund yourself up to the amount of your contribution to the campaign from that surplus. For example, if you contributed $1,500 and you have a surplus of $2,000, you can refund yourself $1,500, and the remaining $500 must be turned over to the clerk. You cannot refund any other contributions. The clerk is required to place surplus monies in trust for use by the candidate or third-party advertiser if they need it for a compliance audit. If neither the candidate nor third-party advertiser requires the funds for these purposes, it becomes the property of the municipality or school board. Next slide. Every council and school board must establish a compliance audit committee. Members of a committee cannot be members of council or school board, an employee, a candidate in the election, or a registered third-party advertiser. The clerk will review contributions reported on candidates' financial forms and prepare a report for consideration by the compliance audit committee if a contributor appears to have exceeded any contribution limits. If it is apparent to the clerk that a contributor has exceeded one or more of the contribution limits, the clerk would report this to the committee, which would meet to determine whether or not they would like to proceed with legal action. Any electors entitled to vote in an election may apply for a compliance audit, even if the candidate has not filed a financial statement. The application must be in writing and set out the electors' reasons why they believe the Municipal Elections Act has been contravened. It must be submitted to the municipal clerk or the secretary of the school board within 90 days of the filing deadline. The Compliance Audit Committee will consider the application and decide whether to retain an auditor to undertake a compliance audit or to undertake a compliance audit of the candidate's financial return. Next slide, please. Once a complaint has been filed, the Compliance Audit Committee is required to review and provide a brief written response for its decision. Compliance Audit Committee meetings are required to be open to the public, but the committee may deliberate in private. The written reasons for the committee's decision shall be given to the candidate, the clerk with whom the candidate filed their nomination, the secretary of the local board, and the applicant. If an audit occurs, the report must be circulated to the same individuals. If the compliance audit determines that there has been an apparent contravention of the Municipal Elections Act, the committee will decide whether to proceed with legal action. Decisions of the committee may be appealed to the Superior Court of Justice. A person who believes that a candidate has contravened the Municipal Elections Act may proceed with legal action without having first obtained a compliance audit. Next slide, please. The Municipal Elections Act also sets out offenses constituting a corrupt practice. A corrupt practice is something very different than a complaint that is submitted to the Compliance Audit Committee. It is criminal and it is handled by a special unit of the OPP. These offenses are outlined on this slide. Next slide, please. This slide outlines some of the penalties that you could face as an individual, a candidate, or a third-party advertiser if you contravene the Municipal Elections Act. And next slide, please. The preliminary list of electors as corrected by the clerk becomes the voters list on September 1st, 2022. The clerk determines how and when individuals can apply to have their name and information corrected or added or removed from the voters list. The clerk can also remove a name from the list if the clerk becomes aware that the person has passed away. Next slide. Candidates running an award are entitled only to that portion of the list that contains the names and the electors entitled to vote for that office. The voters list shall not be posted in a public place, and it shall not be made available to the public by posting on an internet website or any other print or electronic medium of mass communication. Third-party advertisers are not eligible to receive a copy of the voters list. Next slide. In order to ensure those rules are followed and to maintain the privacy of everyone on the voters list, the clerk may require anyone who receives a copy of the list to sign a receipt acknowledging that the list is only to be used for election purposes and that any other use would be in violation of the Municipal Elections Act. Next slide. Eligible electors can appoint another person who is also an eligible elector to vote on their behalf. There are a number of reasons why someone would appoint someone else to vote on their behalf, including absence from the area, illness, or so on. To appoint a proxy, you must submit a proxy form, which must be certified by the municipal clerk. No proxy appointments can be made until all nominations are closed. An eligible proxy voter can only exercise one proxy vote unless the proxy is acting on behalf of a spouse, sibling, parent, child, grandparent, or grandchild, in which case they can be a proxy for more than one person. Municipalities that use alternative voting, such as telephone or internet voting, may choose not to permit proxy voting. Next slide. Candidates, but not third-party advertisers, so only candidates, may appoint scrutineers to represent them during the voting and the counting of votes, including during a recount. Scrutineers may observe, but they are not allowed to interfere with voters, attempt to influence how they vote, or ask a voter how they voted. If a scrutineer is not complying with the rules, they may be asked to leave. Scrutineers are a candidate's representative, so ensure that you choose someone who you feel will follow those rules and will represent you well. You may wish to prepare a document for your appointed scrutineers that details their rights and details everything that they need to know about the Municipal Elections Act and their role. Please note that if a candidate enters a voting place, their appointed scrutineer must leave, as you can only have one representative of a candidate in a voting place at one time. Next slide, please. A recount is automatic if the vote is tied. Councils and school boards also have the option of establishing policies prior to the election that allow for an automatic recount. Council still retains the option to pass a resolution for a recount within 30 days after the clerk has declared the results of the election. An eligible elector can apply to the courts for a recount within 30 days of the clerk's declaration of the results. Next slide. So this slide outlines some of the key dates that you will want to take note of. Please ensure that you double check both the dates and the times. Don't assume that all deadlines close at the end of the day. For example, some of them will be like 2 p.m. and just make sure that you double check. Don't just assume it's 5. Next slide, please. Now, as Sab mentioned, this is the slide that has a couple of different resources, including the guides, the candidates guides and the third-party advertiser guides. I encourage you to take a look at everything that's here. I know we've thrown a lot of information at you. If you have absorbed as much as you can, if you now go and read the guide will make much more sense. And next slide. All right, and that takes us to the end. So up on the slide here, we do have both of our contact information. I will note that Sav is leaving us to move on to a new position. So if you do have any questions, I would encourage you to reach out to me and let her learn her new job. But if you have questions now, you can certainly ask her.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Like you said, it's a lot of information, really great information for candidates. A copy of the presentation will be emailed to all of the attendees after the session, so you'll be able to receive it that way. You can also reach out to your local clerk and they'll be able to provide you with a copy of the presentation. So we'll get to the question and answer period of the session. Again, just as a reminder, if you have any questions, you can put it in the Q&A tab that you can find at the bottom of the Zoom. So we'll go to the first question. So if the candidate works for a corporation or trade union, are they allowed to name or state their employer on campaign material or while speaking to community members? So Sav or Verity, if either one of you want to take this one.
Right. So in addition to any municipal sign bylaws that there may be, you're really just required to put your name on your candidate advertisements. So although technically you can, as I mentioned, you don't want to be seen as collaborating with a corporation or trade union. They are not allowed to contribute to your campaign. So optically, it's not ideal. But again, it's up to you if you choose to do that. But you do need to make sure your name is on it, and you need to make sure that the sign complies with all of the municipality's bylaws. Verity, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you covered that off.
Next question is, how much time is needed or required to be a successful candidate if elected? They're looking for a weekly average.
So I don't really understand this question. Does the person want to come online and give more context, or?
Yeah, I can speak to it as well. I mean, it really, and we can't necessarily give you that advice. We're not political. We're really coming from a Municipal Elections Act and kind of here are the rules perspective. But I do know that kind of one of the most important things is FaceTime. So if you put a lot of hours in talking to people, that's usually the best way to go, but it really depends on who you are, how connected you are, and the volunteer base you have. So it's not a question that can be easily answered, and it's really going to come down to your specific situation.
Allison?
So just because I know who this individual is and potentially where they're going to run, if you're talking about what will be the time commitment if you're elected, that will be different obviously than your campaign window. So if elected and it's somewhere like Sovereign, and we do have a supplemental candidates guide that is up on our website and should be available for you to read. It will go through what your general meeting expectations should be with respect to council and committees and some of the other boards or appointments you could get if you're selected as or elected as a member of council. On average, it really depends on the investment you want to make as a council member. Whether or not you're going to answer those phone calls and emails as well at any hour of the day or just respond to them in certain windows. So there's community events. So I find as a ward councillor or mayor or deputy mayor, you can be as busy or as not busy as you want with respect to community engagement. But there's normally a core set of meetings that you will be required to attend with any municipality, such as council or their general committee on a monthly basis. So hopefully that helps.
And just to add on that too, I'd reach out to your local clerk, check your local municipality's website. Most meetings are streamed and kept afterwards. Watching meetings will give you a good idea of how much time is dedicated to meetings themselves. Looking at agenda packages will give you an idea of how many items council is dealing with on any given day. But yeah, it's really municipal specific, like Allison has stated. So I would really reach out to your clerk just to see what those at least meeting requirements are. And the rest of it, like has been said, it's really how much time and effort you would like to put into it at the end of the day. Jen, do you have something to add?
I'd just like to add that there is considerable time that needs to be spent on returning phone calls and emails to your constituents as well.
Okay, so the next question, can my business donate to their campaign? It's a numbered company corporation, a restaurant. And number 2, can their company advertise for him on their behalf in the restaurant with brochures or social media advertising?
So as I mentioned, candidates cannot, municipal council candidates cannot accept contributions from trade unions or corporations. So no, your restaurant would not be able to contribute to your campaign. An individual person, only an individual person who's eligible can. And the second part of the question, oh, it disappeared. It was.
I will read it out for you.
I got it. The advertising on behalf, that would be third-party advertising. So if your restaurant is spending money on those brochures or, paying for ads to bump up the visibility on social media, they would have to register, they would have to record those expenses. And Verity, is there anything you'd like to add, or anyone else on the panel?
Okay, in a ward with seasonal residents, do they vote in their permanent resident riding and their seasonal residence riding? Does the voters list that candidates are given advise if the resident is permanent or seasonal for each address?
So for this question, I would advise you to go to the voter's guide, and the voter's guide mentions the 3 ways you can qualify to vote in a municipality. So you can be a non-resident elector if you own or rent property in a municipality, but it's not the one where you live, but again, you own or rent property. In terms of the seasonal aspect, and again, the clerks here might have more information, but I think you have to stay there for 6 months or more, and then you're eligible to vote in that municipality. Does anyone want to correct me or?
So as far as what's listed on the voters list, it wouldn't state whether a resident is seasonal or permanent. As Sav has mentioned, if you own, rent, or have the spouse of somebody within a municipality, even though it's seasonal, from the day you acquire ownership, you are an eligible elector, as well as where your permanent residence is if it's in another municipality within Ontario.
Thank you for that assistance.
Allison, did you want to add something?
Thank you. My computer's acting up. The only caveat I want to give out on the seasonal voter thing is that it's only the owner and their spouse. Your children cannot vote at your seasonal residence. So say if you have a family of 6 down in the city, and they're all over 18, they're all eligible to vote, they're welcome to vote there. But only the owner and their spouse are eligible to vote at the seasonal residence. So.
And on that too, there are different rules for campgrounds. So if you have a seasonal residence at a campground, there are separate rules for that. Mm-hmm. Each municipality would require different items. Some municipalities require a list from the campground owner stating who's been there for the required amount of days. So check with your local clerk about the requirements for any campgrounds or trailer parks, that kind of seasonal residence. The next question, if or when elected, are we also required to follow specific financial controls during our term of council?
I'm not sure what they mean by financial controls. Do you understand by any chance?
Like, are you asking if you have to like file a financial report or like keep public records?
If that person who submitted that question, if you could just put clarification in the Q&A, and then we'll get to it once we get to that part of the list. The next question, what is the personal contribution limit? Should that contribution be made by check like any other contribution?
Well, the formula for your self contribution limit is in our presentation, and the clerk will also let you know twice, once when you file your nomination and then once in September. In regards to the second part, does Verity, does anyone want to jump in?
I think it's just much like any other contribution, as long as you can clearly illustrate where it came from, you're good. So you can do a check, you can do an e-transfer, just make sure that it's traceable, essentially.
And yeah, that would be for candidates' contributions to their own campaign. So if you're asking about contribution limits for others who are contributing to your campaign, that limit is $1,200 per candidate, with an upset limit of $5,000 per municipality. And again, it has to be a traceable amount. The next question is, how do you expense items that are vandalized?
Again,
Same way you would expense them. If like expenses are just noting how much money you have spent. So if you spend $500 on signs and 3 of them get vandalized, that doesn't impact how you recorded the expense. If you purchased 3 more signs to replace them, you would just then expense the additional cost, but there isn't really a process for like losses, accounting for losses. You track everything, all of the outgoing costs.
And let us know if that was your interpretation of the question, or if you meant something else. You can follow up and we'll answer your follow-up instead.
Are giveaways permitted? Example, giving away a mug or a pen to someone if they answer a trivia question correctly.
Yeah, you can do that. But again, as long as you record, your expenses for purchasing that, you record the revenue generated as income, and as long as you record it appropriately. And there's actually an example of this in the 2022 Candidates Guide in the Campaign Finance section. So I recommend that you read that example because it goes into more detail.
Is an election night party included in the campaign limit?
So there's a there's a special limit about shows of appreciation and parties on election day or after election day, which will also be provided by the clerk. So it's separate from your spending limit, but it is also limited in some capacity.
Are municipal contributions eligible for a tax receipt, like provincial and federal contributions to candidates?
No.
If acclaimed, example, no one else has registered to run after the deadline, then it is correct to assume I wouldn't need any campaign funding or incur any campaign expenses.
That is correct, but you still need to file the form. So you still need to file the form and basically say, I spent no money and I received no contributions, and then you're done, you're good to go.
Okay, so I see there's some questions in the chat bar. Let me just pull those up. And they are the same questions that we've already answered. So let me, I think we got one more question that came in. The vandalism question. So would the cost associated with replacing a vandalized item go against the campaign limit?
It would just
So
be
if
another
you-
expense that you have to record.
Yeah, if you've spent all of your money already and then something gets vandalized, you can't replace it. If you haven't spent all your money and you have the room in that limit to replace it, then you're fine. But your total amount has to stay under that limit.
And that looks like all of the questions we have.
Renee, have we circled back to the anonymous one that was going to maybe put some extra information in? I'm not sure about that. I just
No, they didn't provide any clarification, but one more question did just come in.
I did see a yes somewhere, and I think that might have been in relation to what Sav asked. And they might have been just responding yes to, that was what we meant.
Let me get back to that anonymous
Okay.
question. Just one moment. We'll go to the next question and I will take a look for it. So if I buy a button making machine instead of buying buttons for the campaign, is that an allowable expense?
Yes, it's just another expense and that's how you would record it. But just remember, if you buy the machine and then you buy the materials like paint or the actual buttons, you have to record that as well.
And if you run again and you use the button making machine again, you would probably have to record the market value of the button making machine again.
So I have had a question posed by a potential candidate, not here online, with respect to your personal phone bill. And then it's a package deal. So then how do you break that out so that you have a portion of it that applies to your campaign? And is there any formula that the ministry can recommend with respect to that?
So this question is very similar to one that we get about gas and driving and how to record your gas expenses. So again, there's no formula. There's nothing in the Municipal Elections Act that I can say you have to do it this way. It's totally up to you. You can be as creative as you want, but however you decide to log it, you need to make sure that it's accurate, it makes sense. Again, if you're taken to a compliance audit committee, you can prove that I filled my gas tank up and it was for this purpose. These are the streets that I drove around. Here's a picture or whatever it is you just decide. In this case of the phone bill, maybe you limit your hours to campaign phone calls are from 6 to 8 p.m. Only, and then you would have to prove that that's how you did it. This is a very interesting case and you'll have to be a bit creative. You may need to get accounting advice. You may need to get legal advice. I'm sorry, we can't really provide that, but you can do it. You just have to figure out a system that's accurate and reasonable.
Thank you. I have another question also posed, and the reason I'm bringing these forward is that I was requested to ask them and to have clarification on them. Contributions for you and your spouse, that does not mean, just to confirm, it does not mean other family member contributions. Confirm or deny.
Sorry, do you mean your self contribution? Or
yeah, your contributions to your campaign.
Yeah, that's only you and your spouse. Yeah.
Thank you. I was just looking for clarification on that to ensure, because it was asked to ask.
No problem. Mm-hmm.
So the anonymous question that we believe we received a yes response to, I'm not too sure if it still clarifies. If or when elected, are we also required to follow specific financial controls during our term on council? So I think we would still need more clarification on that. just to see what aspect you're looking for on whether it would be a financial statement, because there would be no financial statements required under the Municipal Elections Act or the Municipal Act based on a term of council.
So maybe I can step in a little bit here. So with respect to expenses, once you're on council, so once a year, you'll see most municipal treasurers come out with a report as to what expenses have been paid for each council member. So if you attend a conference, or you go to training, or you put in for mileage, or you get a per diem payment, or your monthly or annual salary, that is all disclosed annually publicly. It's required under the legislation. So that part is done, but case in point, so say if you were a realtor as a profession, you get elected to council, your regular business is not subject to any controls under the Municipal Act while you're a council member. So if you operate a restaurant, that your regular business operation would not be subject to any reporting to council because it doesn't relate to why you're on council. What only has to be publicly disclosed is your wage that you receive from the township for your job. So, but if you were sitting as mayor or deputy mayor, there's one that comes out from the lower tier and at the upper tier. So that's important to remember. Hopefully that helps.
Just to follow up on that as well. So each municipality is different on what a member of council can claim it as an expense through the municipality. So there'll be a policy that'll outline, any mileage expenses, any attendance at conferences or sessions or whatnot. Should a member of council spend their own personal money on, say pens that have their name on it, whatever it is that is not through the election campaign, there's no mechanism through any legislation that would require any financial reporting on that aspect. So, your office supplies for at home while you're doing council work, that kind of thing. There's no reporting mechanism as there is through an election campaign. There's a couple more questions that came in.
And if I can just expand further on that. So with respect to accepting of gifts and everything, each municipality would also have a policy on that. And there would be a limit with respect to what you can accept, how you can accept it, and whether or not it would be considered part of the whole municipal contribution. So we do have some regulations with respect to that, or policies.
The next question. So if I put money into my campaign account, max limit to 1,200, and I don't end up using all of that, do I leave it in that account for future expense, or do I give it back to myself after the election?
So that goes back to the campaign surplus piece. If at the end of the election, you say you only spent money that was given to you by other people and you still have $1,200 in there, yes, you can refund that to yourself. If you have $1,500 left over, you can give yourself $1,200 back, and the rest of it has to go to the clerk.
And just to follow up on that, so the maximum limit for contributions to your own campaign is not $1,200. It's based on a formula that's listed in the Elections Act. And the clerk for the municipality in which you're running in is required to provide you with that number. So you would get an estimated amount when you file, and a final amount in September once the voters list has come out.
And the higher of those two is the one that you stick with.
Another question. So when can you begin taking donations after being nominated?
As soon as you would like, but I would recommend opening your bank account first.
And that is the end of our questions. So again, I want to thank everyone for participating. We're scheduled here till 8 o'clock. We've got another half an hour, but we will stick around for another 10 minutes or so and answer any questions you might have. So again, feel free to put it in the Q&A or the chat. And if any questions come in, we will just come on screen and answer them for you.
If I can, for just most candidates, If you're looking to pick up a package or file your nominations, most of us appreciate appointments just because we normally have council meetings and committee meetings and such that we end up in, and we want to make sure that we are available when you come in to make sure that one, we can meet you, and two, so that we can answer any questions that you might have. So appointments are suggested or requested. They're not required, but we do request on good practice that you make those if you want to come in, just so that we're there for you when you come in the door.
Okay, we had one more training, or I was reading the question as I was speaking. We have one more question that's come in. So if elected, will there be any training? So this is going to be municipal specific. Municipalities do provide orientation to their members of council, but the detail and time requirements of that will be really dependent on your municipality. So I would suggest reaching out to the clerk of the municipality that you are looking to run in, and they'll be able to provide you with further details on any orientation or training that you'll be looking at. Another question. So if we paid for something, but it's unusable, example, charged for a bad printing job, and we do not use it for the campaign, do we still have to expense it?
You
So
pay for
again,
it? Yes.
anything you purchase for your campaign, you have to record. As I mentioned, sometimes you can get into a dispute where you don't want to give the person money because, again, maybe the item was damaged. You still have to record that on your financial statement. You can just say payment pending, whatever it is. But remember to just be accountable as possible. It'll benefit you in the long run, and no one will accuse you of, unethical behavior. And sorry, Verity, did you have anything else to add?
Oh yeah, no, that's fine. If, like, say you paid for it and then you didn't like it and they gave you a refund, then still record it on your statements, even if like the balance of that exchange ends up being $0, just keep absolutely everything. But yeah, if you end up out any money, you have to, it is an expense.
Okay, so I'm not seeing anything else come in. So with that, I think we'll end the night. And just a reminder, again, with so much information being provided, there is an in-person session being held on July 7th. That will be held in Aurelia at Rotary Place on University Avenue, starting at 6 p.m. Registration is required and is being taken by the clerk's department at the township of Oro-Medonte, or you can just reach out to your local clerk and we can get you registered or provide you with further information. So please feel free, even if you were in attendance tonight, to join us for the in-person session, and urge anybody who you think might be wanting to run for council, might be on your campaign teams that are helping you out. It's a really great session for them as well, just so that they learn the rules and are able to better support you in your campaign. But with that, thank you everyone so much for attending. Thank you, Sav and Verity. That was such a great presentation. And we will see you July 7th for the in-person session.
And thank you again for having us and for your time this evening.
Good luck, everyone.